lost since it's Sakinah on me. How do I feel? It's like peace inside my heart, and I know that it's real.
Start out by asking you guys, what do you think is domestic violence? Yes.
I know a case in which the man has become alcoholic drinker, and after that he do domestic violence, and he says that I was drunk, I was not in my senses, and then later he apologized. So I want to know, do you have some counselor working on alcoholic withdrawal as well? Because I think that the main problem is alcoholism. Otherwise he has master degree and he has one kids and he is okay, but when he drinks he goes out of control.
This is a classic example, and thank you for bringing it up. Domestic abuse, it occurs in intimate relationships, and it could be a marriage or it could be another intimate relationship, and it is about domination and control. And under that, I want to answer your question first. There is physical abuse, there is emotional abuse, there is mental abuse, and there is sexual abuse or financial abuse. So all of this come under the category of domestic abuse or domestic violence. A lot of times we think that domestic violence is just physical violence. But it's not just physical violence. It could be mental, emotional abuse, and actually mental and emotional abuse is more difficult to detect than physical abuse because the scars are not there. However, the impact could be very devastating, and I'm going to talk more about it. So what is the purpose or goal? The purpose or goal is about control and power. Who are the victims? Is it only women? No, we are talking more about women, but the victims are children, the victims are men, the victims are women. It happens in heterosexual relationships. It also happens in homosexual relationships. So why do we talk more about women? Because it is more prominent. The percentage of women being abused or victimized is more than the percentage of men, especially physical or sexual abuse. Why? Because, men have more power, psychological power, cultural power, and as well as physical power. How do you know that you are being abused? The most telling sign is fear. You are constantly in fear of your partner. You're always watching over your shoulders. You are always thinking of what to do, what to say, where you're going, who you're talking to, and I'm going to talk more about that also. You may feel that something's terribly wrong with you. Why do you feel that? There is this whole phenomenon that the victim of abuse starts developing this feeling of learned helplessness. Something is wrong with me and I deserve this. Otherwise it would not have happened to me. So the woman or the victim starts feeling that it is her fault. Can anybody guess why this is happening? I want to open this to discussion. That it's my fault that this is happening to me. Yes, go ahead.
It has a lot to do with upbringing. If you grew up in an environment where your mom or your dad, especially if you're a woman, has taught you that you need to be you need to act a certain way when you're married, and you need to do certain things to your husband, like cook a certain way and make sure that you listen and are obedient. I think those kind of teachings are probably sort of the culprit to why women have learned helplessness.
Yes, that's a very good point. I remember when I was growing up, my mom used to tell me, you have to talk very softly. I had a loud voice because it looks really bad. So in our culture, and I did a dissertation It was the only one in my school of its kind. It was Attitudes of Pakistani Women Towards Help Seeking. And what I found in that dissertation is the way we are raised, like you're talking about. We are raised to be protected. And then, what is the role of the woman? She carries the honor of the family. Honor and shame is a very big part of our culture. Have you ever heard somebody saying, and I see this all the time, even now, you talk to somebody, oh, how many kids do you have? And they would say, oh, I have a daughter, I have a son. And you praise the daughter, oh, your daughter is very smart, or your daughter is very beautiful. And you know what the mom would say? In Urdu, can somebody guess? I think you know the answer.
Yes, but I don't know. No, I cannot guess.
The mom would say, Allah uski qismat achhi kare. They don't say that about their sons. They say that only about the daughter. Have you heard it? Bas dua kare, Allah uski qismat achhi kare. Which means women are passive recipients. They are recipient to the fate. जैसी उसकी किस्मत होगी बस उसके साथ ये अच्छा हो जाए. We have to be passive and wait for good fortune to come to us. And if bad fortune comes to us, too bad. So, because the women have this burden of carrying the honor of the family, if something happens to the woman, and she cannot save her marriage, what's going to happen? Her little younger sisters are not going to get married. It's going to bring shame to the family. It's going to be the talk of the town. So she has to do everything to keep this marriage. I personally have friends who are physicians, who are doctors, and they are in abusive relationships. These women have no financial problems because they are physicians themselves. They cannot leave these relationships. You know what? Several reasons. When they were younger, they had to worry about their parents and their brothers and sisters because it would bring shame. Now they're older. They have teenage children. They cannot get out now because their daughters will not get married. So they're waiting for their daughters to get married. Nobody would marry the daughter if the mom is divorced. People don't talk about the father divorced, they talk about the mother divorced. So the woman starts feeling this learned helplessness. She feels like something is wrong with me. There is a saying that is in the movies, that is in the stories, and you might have heard this. Tumhari is ghar se, I'm sorry brother Anas, excuse myself, but these are some very big sayings in the community. Is ghar se doli niklegi, doli ja rahi hai, is ghar se janaza niklega. All the women are nodding. You are married in this household, but you can only come out as a dead body. There is a saying that this is the advice that mothers give to their daughters on the day of the marriage. So I have a physician who is a client of mine, and she said, well, that I was told that on the day of my marriage, and there was no physical abuse, but there was intense emotional and sexual abuse. And I want to talk about the other kinds of abuses also and how you can recognize it, and then I want to talk about the cycle of your abuse. I don't want to take too much time though, so I feel like there's so much I want to talk about in so little time. So this physician, she was in this abusive relationship and she could not leave, and she was in that marriage for 12 years until finally the husband cheated and she had to leave. And you know what happened? She got remarried. She had no intention of getting remarried again, but circumstances she got remarried and she's again in an abusive relationship. And she comes to me. This is a highly educated woman, very beautiful, very smart. And she said, oh my God, I'm a failure. I couldn't keep 2 marriages. Something's terribly wrong with me. It causes anxiety, it causes depression, it causes a syndrome called post-traumatic stress disorder. And post-traumatic stress disorder is what happens to veterans of war, people who come, the soldiers who come out, Iraq war, Afghanistan war, they are the ones who suffer from post-traumatic stress disorder. And it's a very serious disorder. But these women, are suffering from it. There is one research that is saying that women in the shelters, domestic violence shelters, about 40 to 80% of women in domestic violence shelters today are suffering from post-traumatic stress disorder. So you can understand why the woman stays in it. And children, I want to talk about the children. I have a friend right now who is in an abusive relationship, and she has 2 daughters. One is getting very depressed and the other one is very angry. And the woman doesn't understand it. The whole life, the daughters have seen this there was physical, sexual, the daughters didn't see the sexual piece, that there was physical, sexual and emotional abuse. The daughter did see the physical and the emotional abuse, but one of the daughters, she hates her mother and she's very angry at the mother, and I'm going to tell you why. You know what? That daughter is scared. She is identifying with the aggressor because she's scared that she would become like her mother, and that fear is making her get very angry at the mother. So now she's acting out because she would rather be somebody like her father who has power and control, who wants to be victimized. So she's angry at the mother for being a victim. And you know what? The mother put up with all this because of the daughters. Now it's messing up the daughters' lives. And do you think these girls would know how to get along with their spouses? They wouldn't. Actually, they can become abusers themselves. There are two things typically that happen. You are either acting in or acting out. When you are very upset, when you're depressed, some people they get depressed, but some people they get angry and they act out. Now these girls are at high risk of actually becoming boy crazy. Why am I saying that? Because their self-esteem will be so low that they will try to find self-esteem through their relationship with boys, and they would get into abusive relationships. They will be actually getting attracted to boys who have potential of abuse. Okay, now I did talk about the physical abuse. That's easy, right? The scars are there, you could see it. Actually, it's better. I prefer physical abuse over the other kinds of abuse because you have a scar, you have a reason, you go to your mom and say, look what he did to me. And the mom would be like, oh yes. But it is very hard to prove emotional abuse. Oh, he's putting me down, he's yelling at me, he is constantly humiliating me in public. Well, he's giving you food, clothing and shelter, what else do you want? That's the woman laughing, right? And then there's sexual abuse. What is sexual abuse? You asked me the question. It is forced sex. And it could be acts of sex that are unsafe. Or it could be unwanted or degrading. I did have a client, she was talking about some sexual acts that he was doing, which were actually very un-Islamic, but she submitted to that. I had one client who came to me. I'm giving you stories because it just makes it more real. One client came to me, and this was a very young couple, in their 20s. And the husband was having emotional affairs, and the woman didn't feel like going to bed with him when she found out. And he said, the angels are, farishte tum par laanat bhejenge. You heard that? When you refuse sex, the angels are, humiliating. The angels are mad at you. So this was a very religious woman, and she came to me and she said, is that true? Ki farishte mujh par laanat bhejenge? I'm so scared. You see how religion and culture gets so intertwined and gets so mixed up. So this woman is feeling guilty, and she's feeling something's wrong with her. So she's submitting to it, and then what happens? She gets very angry. So this woman who was in her 20s, you know what she did? She said, I didn't know, I just couldn't take it any longer because I kept taking that abuse, and one day I just couldn't take it. I called up my friend and we went to a bar and I got drunk. There had to be some outlet. And then after getting drunk, she had never drunk in her life. She was a very religious woman. After getting drunk, she felt even guilty. She felt worse, and look what happens. The cycle continues. So I'm going to talk a little bit about the abuse cycle. see this? There is abuse. After the abuse comes guilt. So the abuser, it is really hard to leave the abuse, and I want to explain it to you. There's a cycle of abuse. After the abuse, there is guilt. So the abuser feels guilty. Now, what's very interesting is that, are they feeling guilty because they abused you? No. They're feeling guilty because they got caught. After the guilt, they're going to make an excuse why they did it. And the excuse typically blames the victim. You know what? You didn't cook good food. Or, one of my clients, she got divorced because the rotis burned. You don't know how to please a man. I came home, I'm tired, I'm exhausted, you should have pleased me. Or you're this, or you're that. They make an excuse, which the excuse is kind of, you made this happen. You triggered my anger. It's the alcohol. Somebody asked me about that. You asked me about that. It's the alcohol. It's not me. I lose control when I'm drinking. So you need to understand that. And you need to get me the help. So they make an excuse. After the excuse, the behavior is normal. So this is why it is so hard to recognize and leave the abuse. Because the behavior is not always abusive. It becomes normal after a while. Okay, you know what? It was the alcohol. I'm not this kind of a man. They can bring flowers. They can be extra nice. And things go back to normal. And when things go back to normal, the victim forgets that it ever happened. The problem is that it doesn't stay normal. Then there is fantasy. The abuser starts fantasizing, which means he starts thinking how I can do this again, because he thinks about the past abuses, he thinks about the past behaviors. And then there is a setup. Let me give you an example. There's a setup where the woman will behave, or the victim will behave in a way that will make the abuser get angry again, and the abuse will start all over again. There is one research that a victim leaves 8 or 9 times before she finally leaves the abuser. Why is that? Because she's very confused. I would rather have this abuser act like this all the time. It would be so much easy, but they don't act like this all the time. So you understand this learned helplessness, this cycle of abuse. They don't. So it's very hard for a woman, and she starts personalizing it. Now, why is the abuser doing it? It's about power, it's about control. Studies have shown that the perpetrators have really a very poor sense of self-esteem. And they feel powerful when they can dominate somebody who's weaker. So coming back to your alcohol question, I want to make sure I answer that question. He needs help for the alcohol, but he needs to take responsibility for his behavior. There is tons of help out there, and you know what? He knows that. We as a community need to take action. We as a community, why don't all of us look around? I am sure, because I have found people that I'm very close to. Besides my clients, I've found my friends or my relatives who are in abusive relationships. Why don't we all take responsibility to look around ourselves and help those women? Your question was, what should we do? We need to look for signs. Is this woman always scared all the time? Does she get calls all the time? Like when she's out, she's getting calls. Where are you? Who are you with? That's a sign. Money is a big form of control. She never has access to money. What the abuser does is dominance. That's a big one. Isolation. That's a very big one. You isolate them. You keep them away from the rest of the world. And they learn to believe that they deserve it. I had an Indian woman, and she said her whole life she was told that her color is very dark. So So even growing up, when she was a young girl and she used to get proposals, she wouldn't get good proposals because she was a darker color. So she grew up, she's a very smart woman by the way, she grew up having low self-esteem. Then she got into this marriage and there was no physical abuse, there was only emotional abuse. He was extremely controlling. She didn't recognize it. She thought it's because, she just deserves it. She doesn't deserve anything good. The result of the abuse could be depression, anxiety, post-traumatic stress disorder, and a lot of other problems.
Sakinah, 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 Sakinah.